Ramsey MHK Alex Allinson is stepping down from the Keys after 2 terms representing the town. In this interview, he reflects on why government has failed to deliver over the past 5 years, tells us why Manx Care is still the best option for delivering healthcare, and discusses some of the fundamental differences that led to his departure from Council of Ministers. Do you still have a role in government as we approach the election, or are you blissfully escaped from all of that?
I'm not blissfully escaped, but thanks very much for the invitation to have a chat. No, when Tynwald was dissolved last week, I ceased to be an MHK. Unfortunately, I'm not in government, so I'm now back to civilian life.
Right, okay. Well, there's so much we could potentially talk about. I know you have very famously, despite the provocation, tried to talk about issues and not personalities. So we'll see how we get on with this interview and where we end up. But obviously, you've had a fairly key role in the past 2 governments. You were Education Minister in Howard Quayle's government. Did you have any other roles in there?
I had roles in the Cabinet Office, Department of Home Affairs. I was Chair of Manx Utilities as well. Yeah. And then asked to step up to be Education Minister. Yeah.
And then, of course, you move into the Treasury Minister's role.
Via Department for Enterprise for a couple of months.
Yeah. So you have some experience in most of the a number of the big departments in government. What would you say to the wannabe MHKs who are all giving a very simple message to the voter about how easy it is to resolve, and how all you need is a bit of common sense and a bit of just some basic knowledge about how things should work, and it's not as simple as that, though, is it?
Nothing in life is as simple as that, and the workings of government are really complicated and very entwined with the workings of our nation and our people and the diversity of our people, and there's lots of different viewpoints that need to be taken into account. Again, prospective candidates are standing as members of Parliament. The fact that we only have 24 MHKs mean a lot of those who are successful will be asked to be part of government, but the two are very, very different. A government is there to manage and lead the nation, to provide services, to try to promote our economy. Parliament is there to pass laws, to make our island a better place and deal with the challenges we have, and to hold government to account. And sometimes they do get quite intertwined. Sometimes they get quite confused about the different roles and the different positions of those roles. But I wish all the candidates well. It is hard work. It is very intensive. There is such a lot of reading you need to do, even about those subjects that you think you know everything about. There's an awful lot of research you need to do to be on top of your game. And also, because we don't have a party system, although I know Liberal Vannin will be standing and Manx Labour Party will be standing, it is a matter of consensus politics, of trying to get on with the people, even though you may come from different backgrounds, have different views, to get on with people for the good of the nation, because you are there to serve the people who put you in that role.
So what has gone wrong then over the course of the last 5 years? Because there was a relative clarity as to what the public wanted in terms of who they voted for. Yep. There was some level of commonality in the manifestos of the MHKs that were elected. There was a fairly clear vision. Maybe it took a bit longer than perhaps many of you would have liked to get to our island plan, but it had a clear vision about what it wanted to do, and primarily, the way to fill the economic black hole the government finances black hole was to grow the economy, and that just doesn't seem really to have taken off, does it?
Yeah, so I would challenge you in terms of everything that's gone wrong. An awful lot of things went right. But I think people do concentrate on the negatives. I think when you had Alf Cannon on, he sort of reminded people what we went through the first year and a half of the administration, getting out of COVID, dropping all the restrictions, the COVID restrictions, even though that was a bit of a battle against the Department of Health. They were still incredibly worried about the health service, quite rightly. We dropped the restrictions, we got out of COVID. It was then a chance to work on the economic strategy, to work on rebuilding. And then suddenly the Russians invaded Ukraine. And I think looking back to that, you have to remember how much of a seismic shift that was. We were getting out all the nuclear plans for what happened if war broke out right across Europe. We were looking at the same issues in terms of food security, energy security that we'd done during COVID. What happens if the pipelines were cut? What happens if the telecommunications were cut? And we had to deal with the economic effects on the island. We had to also have a humanitarian aspect in terms of welcoming Ukrainians over here for the first time, really. We had refugees coming to the Isle of Man and really committed ourselves to work with the international community to do that. And then after that, there was one crisis after another. And I think what went wrong, perhaps, is that we got distracted. We, not just being government, but Tynwald as well, got distracted from some of the key priorities that we set out to deal with, which were health, education, housing, the economy. It was constant firefighting, constant looking over your shoulder, constant dealing with whatever would happen the next day. And it was relentless right the way through. And I think when you look at some of the principles of the island plan and the economic strategy, they still make absolute sense. We do need to grow our economy. We still have skills gaps. We do need to get more tourists over here. We need to diversify our economy and deal with the opportunities and challenges of AI, of a world that's incredibly more unstable than it's ever been, really, in terms of politics, but also economics as well. And we need to carve out a niche for the Isle of Man that makes us different to other places, to attract people and business here, and keep the country going. And that is down to government revenue so that we can afford some of the advances in healthcare and education. I mean, when you look at the amount of money that's been put into those key areas for our young people and our people in general through healthcare, it's been absolutely unprecedented. But what I think has not been achieved is people seeing the real benefits of that. And I think because of all the firefighting, we haven't been able to achieve the outcomes for individual people that we should have done.
And of course, you mentioned health, and the clue is in the title, Dr. Alex Allinson. What a lot of people will have noticed, certainly political people with an interest in Manx politics will have noticed, is the significant increase in budgets. And some people have noticed significant benefit as a result of that increase in budget. But many people will have said, well, I haven't really noticed that much of a difference. That, we still have waiting lists. We still have people who find that their treatment isn't as good as perhaps that they might have expected. Is it ever possible to afford to fund the health service to the extent of effectively treating everything that is treatable?
So it is. But we have to be realistic in terms of people's expectations, in terms of what they'll get and how much it will cost. I also think on a small island we need to accept that we can't do everything here, and it will cost more to do the things that we do here, and we will need to send people across for care. The reason for that is that medicine has got far more complicated. The human body hasn't changed very much at all, even since I was in medical school, but the things we can do to it has got amazingly complicated. MRI scans, palliative chemotherapies, treatments for diseases that weren't really on the books originally, even 10 years ago, with some of the new syndromes being found and the new treatments being developed for them. What I think is really important is that we don't, as some politicians have suggested, say the NHS is no longer affordable and we should move to a different model of insurance-based systems or private healthcare. The NHS will work. It has worked. It has done our nation a huge amount of good over the last 50 years, and certainly the UK. And it is one of the most efficient ways of providing healthcare. But it needs to involve patients more. It needs to put them at the forefront, and it needs to be primary care based and prevention led. The thing, even when I was a GP before I went into politics, every year primary care and dental services would underspend, and it would just get sucked up towards nobles to paying for their overspends. And the hospital that we've got, the consultants we've got, all the equipment we've got, the nurses and all the people who work there do a tremendous job. But what we need to do is bring care closer to people's homes, make sure people only go into hospital when they really need to and get out really quickly, because that's a very inefficient way of providing care.
And I suppose the frustrating thing, certainly for me, hearing that, is this is what we were being told when I first became an MHK, and indeed I was briefly member responsible for health in the old DHSC, and that's what we were talking about then. And that's
always been
ago.
the case. It's always been the case that as soon as you get through the doors of nobles, the clock starts ticking, the scans start being done, the blood tests start being done, people are put into beds, and suddenly you get a very expensive system which it starts dividing people up into different organs and dealing with them in different ways, whereas what you need is more holistic healthcare based in primary care.
So I suppose the question is, why does it take so long? I mean, because that's quarter of a century that we've been talking about.
The key issue is that successive health departments have always said that they want to provide primary care-led NHS. They've always absolutely acknowledged that's the best way and the best way for people to deal with that. But the pressures of nobles, the pressures of, as you said, waiting lists for things like cataract operations, hip operations, knee operations, has always politically been the main motivator. And then recently, we found seeing your own doctor has become a problem because of shortages of GPs. And you can trace that back to exactly the same issues in the UK, that you've had large amounts of money going into secondary care, relatively very little money going into primary care, where 90% of the work of the NHS goes on. And so you get this disparity, and you get the demoralised primary care team who then feel disenfranchised by the whole thing. Now, the whole idea with the split and the creation of Manx Care and splitting from the department was to change that. And unfortunately, despite 5 years, it hasn't. We still have an underfunded primary care system. People still have issues seeing a GP and issues with GPs being able to treat them properly. And so we haven't tackled some of the waiting lists, which really should have been done by now. I mean, Tynwald approved tens of millions of pounds for completely reorganising some of the surgical systems around cataract surgery, and cleared significant waiting lists, and it's just built up after that. And it is that emphasis, that courage, and that commitment to affect change that needs to happen. And again, as a doctor, the medical profession has always been relatively conservative. Some of my consultant colleagues have resisted change, and without clear leadership, that has stifled some of the innovations that should have happened.
In terms of Manx Care, what depends who you speak to. Obviously, there are plenty of people who will say, particularly wannabe MHKs standing for the keys at the moment, will be saying we need to go scrap Manx Care and go back to what was apparently working before. But of course, we know that it wasn't really working before. Then we have people who perhaps have been much closer to the whole discussion, indeed the current health minister, Claire Christian, saying, actually, Manx Care, there are issues there in terms of that whole relationship between Manx Care and DHSC. But Manx Care version 2 is possible and will potentially be the best solution.
Yeah. As an ex-politician, you will know if you sit still long enough, things come full circle, and reorganisations happen. You end up back where you started. The reality, when we had a department for health, that didn't really work. So social care was brought back into it. That's far better in terms of a combined holistic approach to people's health and welfare. And then That didn't quite work, and part of that was the politics, part of that was the lack of clear leadership and lack of clear clinical leadership. And so Manx Care was set up as this sort of arm's length body that would have a lot more clinical input, that would perhaps be less likely to be manipulated by politicians. The days when an MHK could phone up and get one of their constituents bumped up the waiting list, and it used to happen. That's awful. That's absolutely awful, above and beyond their clinical need. So that's gone. What Manx Care have managed to do is start putting people first, start looking at the safety aspects, the quality of care. And actually, when you compare what we have now, it's significantly better than before, but it's still not perfect. And there's still an awful lot that needs to be done. Using before, if you want to know where you were on a waiting list, when your scan was done, you'd have to phone around a whole lot of secretaries, and you'd never get the answer. And I'm talking about as a doctor, never mind a patient. Now with MCAL set up, people get answers straight away. They may not like the answer, but they'll get an answer straight away. So there's a lot of good stuff going on, but it needs to be properly financed and properly driven. And Claire Christian has done a really good job. This is her first ministerial position. It is the hardest in government. She's done a good job of trying to look at the governance system and saying it can't be either or. You can't have a politician who steps back from Manx Care but answers all the questions in Tynwald and apologises for it. You have to have more political involvement, but working with the establishment of Manx Care, and also making sure that the clinical input is there in terms of the Manx Care Board, which we will see through the establishment of the Clinical Senate and by a lot of the consultants being brought on board so we can work together to effect meaningful change.
You sort of touched on earlier some of the issues associated with why government hasn't perhaps delivered as much as it might. And there are, as an ex-politician, an ex-minister, I know how frustrating it is being a minister and recognising that an awful lot of the things that affect people quite deeply in the Isle of Man and affect our economy and affect the way we do business as a government are things that are completely out with the control of the Isle of Man government. Big global economic factors, which you can't really do an awful lot about. That is quite frustrating, isn't it? When you get, I imagine, I never got to be Treasury Minister, but you get into the Treasury and then you realise actually you've not got as much control over what's going on here as perhaps people might think.
Yeah, I when I got into the administration, I stood against Alf Cannon as Chief Minister. He won, it was fair and square, and I wanted to go into Department for Enterprise because I've been working with them quite closely over COVID and saw the advantages of doing that. And the key for me was to hit the ground running with the new administration, 100-day plan, get through a whole lot of policies and start delivering for people. So we did that in DFE in terms of doing the steer report, looking at aviation, looking at connectivity, doing the childcare strategy, whole range of issues. And then I was asked to go into Treasury. And to be honest with you, I spent a huge amount of my time in Treasury dealing with healthcare spending and trying to figure out where all the money was going to and what they actually needed rather than what they just wanted, and trying to get that right. But also dealing with some of the crises that hit us, particularly in terms of the cost of living, inflation going over 10%, standing up and saying that we were going to freeze electricity prices and taking a significantly risk on that because we weren't quite sure how long things would go on for in terms of the hyperinflation we saw, and dealing with that was hard work, but we did the right thing. But again, it was distracting us from some of the keys of the economic strategy, and it makes it very difficult to start, increasing tourism, getting people over here to invest when you're also dealing with those external factors that you talk about. But I think one of the other issues that has dogged this administration is Moneyval, is being inspected by people in the rest of the world and being judged according to their standards in terms of financial transparency. We also had Pillar 2 and having to change our corporate tax structure to match the rest of the world so we didn't become pariahs. Now, that's great. It's lovely to be given a gold star from these people and told you're doing a wonderful job, but it significantly reduces our autonomy. It also significantly reduces the difference with doing business on the Isle of Man compared with anywhere else in the world. And what I really hope the aspiring politicians will do is look, if they're successful and they come into Tynwald, look at how we can regulate for growth, how we can look at how we regulate a whole range of issues, not just financial services, not just the AI, not just the e-gaming, but also how we regulate things like planning, how we can look at those blockers that everyone knows, the business knows is there, how we can try to remove those to allow people to do business in the Isle of Man who are here and attract new businesses over. Because if we don't, and we go down to the common denominator, what makes the Isle of Man different? Yes, it's a beautiful place and it's safe, but what makes it different to hold people here? And so I think following the Money Val report, whatever the result is, and government will deal with that and we'll get over it. It's not the end of the world. We can deal with that. We've done it before. We do need that reset in terms of what is our, people talk about USPs, unique selling point, but more than that, what makes the Isle of Man the best place to do business? And part of that is you can see the right people, get a decision, and actually move forward without all the bureaucracy, the red tape, everything that goes in there, but do it in a safe, transparent way that doesn't get you wrapped over the knuckles by the World Bank or the OECD.
I'm going to ask you a question now, and the way I ask the question will probably give you a hint as to what I think. Have we become too risk averse in government? If you look back perhaps 30 years ago, when Isle of Man government really was very responsive and receptive to ideas coming in terms of growing the economy and supporting business and all of that, and indeed in all other walks of life, government was far more responsive. If you went and spoke to the minister and the minister thought it was a good idea, there's a fair to middling chance it was going to happen. Yeah. Whereas now, you talk to most businesses, most people trying to engage with government, and they will say that it's hardly worth bothering because it's so overly bureaucratic. Now, is that fair, do you think? That have things changed dramatically, or is this a little bit of rewriting history and rose-tinted spectacles?
I unfortunately, Phil, I think you're absolutely right. And there are a whole range of reasons for that. Part of the reasons are the media, the scrutiny government comes under now, not just from the local media, the international media. And the Manx Radio have shown reports of how, for instance, if you look at King Gaming, there was criminal activity there. But actually, when you looked at the proposals, it looked quite a good deal for the island to get these people. They were going to build here. They were going to have a big facility built here that was going to spearhead some of the infrastructure of the island. They were going to attract people here. It was going to increase income, increase jobs.
Too good to be true?
On the face of it, it looked fairly valid. But this was a sophisticated criminal enterprise. And again, the Isle of Man has often dealt with those, whether that be rum smuggling in the good old days where you could get away with it, to pirate radio, to all sorts of things that were then classed as illegal. But on the back of that, in answer to your question, yes, I think we have become too risk averse, because when we get things wrong, and you will always get some things wrong, things will be too good to be true. But if you don't take a risk on that, a calculated risk, and constantly review it, you will never get the real nuggets that actually turn out to be incredibly successful for the island. If you look back to the regulatory changes that attracted e-gaming here in the start, they were very risky, and we did very well, and we attracted a lot of income here, a lot of jobs here for local people and people moving over here. So there is that need to constantly reinvent ourselves. And the Isle of Man has always done that. But it's done that with a risk environment and people willing to take responsibility and occasionally put their hands up and saying, look, sorry, we got that wrong. The problem now is if you say, I've got that wrong, people ask for your resignation. And also the problem is for the civil service that the risk is they're going to get sacked. And again, people talk about, faceless civil servants, and there has become this discourse about the civil service. One of the great privileges of being in government is working with the people of the civil service, right the way through from Department of Home Affairs with, police officers, the fire brigade, to education, then to Treasury with all the people who deal with all the really complicated tax problems people get. We have some incredible people working for the civil service. But if they make a mistake, they lose their job. And if you lose your job in government, it's very hard to get another job on the island. So, and they're here for the long term. They're not here just for 5 years and then go for re-election. They're here for the long term. They've put down roots. They've started families. So, again, the role of politicians is to create that safety net as well, to make sure that when we make decisions, when we get our risk assessments, when we go out to the rest of the world and say, come here, see what we have, we also protect those people who work for the civil service. Part of the Moneyval process is all these risk assessments for a whole range of things. And they show that most of the time we're moderate risk, some slightly higher risk when we're doing business with people off island and offshore. But again, it's a calculated risk. And I hope that after some of the intensive soul-searching and, for want of a better word, navel-gazing of Moneyval, we can perhaps get our head above the water again and say, right, let's go out. Let's go out to the rest of the world. Let's carve a niche for ourselves. Let's see how we can do things differently here. Whether that's regulations, as we've done before, that's legislation like we've done before, but how we can make the Isle of Man something different, something to be proud of, take calculated risks, but also put ourselves back on the map.
Was it a mistake, do you think, for Tynwald to agree to pay everybody, all the MHKs, pretty much the same amount of money? So you could, if you chose, just concentrate on turning up to all the coffee mornings and events in your constituency, and then once a week turning up to the House of Keys, once a month turning up to Tynwald, and that's all you really need to do to get the same money as someone who not only tries to fit all that constituency work in and the parliamentary work, but they also work on a parliamentary scrutiny committee, or they might work on 1-2 departments or take on a ministerial role. And effectively, the difference in pay between a minister now and a member who could just be focused purely on getting themselves re-elected in 5 years' time, it's hardly worth the risk.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I gave submission. So in the last administration, we had a review of MHK's pay, and people get a bit fixated on the pay for MHKs. There's 24 of us. If you didn't give any pay, you get lots of old retired people who could afford to do it. What we have now in terms of our Tynwald is the most diverse Tynwald there. You've got people of all ages, all genders. You've got people from all the different backgrounds who are there to represent the diversity of the Isle of Man. It's brilliant. When you look back at the Lisfane report, we had diversity that was on a par with Iran. We've now in this administration had a really mixed, even council of ministers was 50-50 between the sexes. And when you look at the age and the experience of some of the people, and the experience they bring is fantastic. So I think pay is a red herring. What you're talking about is the review, which basically said, should we have a flat rate of pay and stop some of the patronage that goes on? Because again, the alternative of that is if you get more pay for being in government and you feel that, well, if you disagree with the Chief Minister, you might lose £10,000-20,000 a year. Are you going to disagree? Is it going to stifle democracy? I think the jury's out. I think we need to wait for the next Tynwald. Is this about the money or is this about the personalities? I would like to think it was possibly about the personalities. Nobody should go into Tynwald for the pay. I mean, when I put my name in the ballot, I didn't even know what the pay scale was. I was a bit shocked when I found out because it was significantly less than I was getting as a doctor. But that was fine. It was no worries. We need to make sure that those people who are standing for election are going to roll their sleeves up and get involved. And unfortunately, that means also getting involved in government. It's too small a place. Yes, you can have scrutiny. Yes, you can ask questions. but it's also your responsibility to help come up with some of the solutions as well. And it's very easy in politics to be at the sidelines throwing stones. We see that in all parliaments. Ours is a bit too small. They will bounce back at you from the walls very, very quickly.
And I suppose the other element to this then that you've sort of alluded to earlier in that answer is about personalities. And now, obviously, you have famously been thrown under the bus by the Chief Minister, and he was quite clear about what he felt the problem was, which was that you had a different political philosophy to him. Now, you were very, very measured in terms of the way you responded to that. Is the Chief Minister sort of right in as much as his Council of Ministers probably didn't reflect his personal political view?
Yes. And actually, I don't think it ever will do. And it was interesting when the Constitutional Legal Affairs Committee asked him and Howard Quayle and some of the other chief ministers what they felt. And all of them had different challenges. Howard Quayle felt incredibly challenged by Treasury, because Alf Cannon was the Treasury Minister at the time, and he had his attack dogs with him as well, and he was incredibly powerful. When Alf Cannon became Chief Minister, he realised that he probably had less power than he did in Treasury. And actually his role was to get together a council of ministers from people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different politics and political viewpoints, but to work as collegiately to further a combined profile, a combined programme, which in the previous administration was the Programme for Government. This time it's the Island Plan. So the Chief Minister has a lot of power, but he also has to get people around the table, and that's the essence of it in any government. You can see exactly the same with the cabinet in the UK, and some of the struggles they have holding things together when things get tough.
I suppose at least with the political structure in the UK, they do tend to have stood under a similar manifesto, whereas in the Isle of Man it's quite different, and you can have, and I think in pretty much every Council of Ministers, every iteration there's been since the Council of Ministers was brought in, you have had people from across the political spectrum represented, probably as wide a selection in Council of Ministers as would have existed in Tynwald more generally, on the simple basis that you don't vote in a government, you vote in individual parliamentarians who can become that government.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, when Alf Cannon formed the first cabinet, you look at the people on it. They were from very different politics, experiences, but all of and personalities as well. But all of us were committed to the Island Plan and to see it through. And I would say that certainly at the start, the Council of Ministers was probably the most diverse and probably the most progressive and left-wing that we've ever had on the Isle of Man, and because of the people that he selected. And it worked really well, but with the constant challenges, things started. I think there was some distraction from that plan, and then when things got really tough, there were some reversals of policy that some of us weren't prepared to go along with.
And there were two big issues, I would say, that were very common to all the manifestos of the successful Keys candidates 5 years ago. One was housing, which perhaps we'll come on to. The other one was the green agenda. Yep. What perhaps, would surprise many people really is how limited Isle of Man government has been in terms of actually defending that agenda. What seems to happen is that lots of people from a different political perspective say things that are quite negative towards net zero, for example, and nobody really seems to be championing that cause.
Yeah, and again, you look back at Greta Thunberg having the demonstrations outside the school and outside Parliament, and there was this huge movement around the world and on our island to take climate change seriously. quite rightly. And a lot of that was led by younger people, but also their parents and grandparents. And so Howard Quell declared a climate emergency. We've got the Climate Act. We've made commitments, on par with the best in the world to deal with this in a responsible way. But then you have to make difficult decisions, and people have to see, individuals have to see the benefit of these decisions. Unless you communicate that properly with people, they expect things to be taken away from them. They expect diesel cars, petrol cars, motorbikes to be taken away from them. They can't have a gas boiler anymore. They've got to do this because the state says you have to have an air source heat pump and you have to have solar panels on your roofs. And then the state says that we should have offshore wind and onshore wind. And suddenly people feel lacking control and lacking autonomy for that. And it's trying to bring that back. So again, the essence of net zero, it's just a term. What we're talking about is providing energy security at a decent price on our island. And what's the best way of doing it? And we used to import oil, and we got rid of that, and then we imported gas, and that will run out at some point. Or get more expensive because it's on the open market and we've got no control over that. So the next idea is to actually produce our own electricity. And wind power, solar power is undoubtedly the best way of doing that. People have been trying for decades to do wave power, tidal power. It wouldn't work here because it'd be far too expensive. But there are other ways of providing electricity and other ways of providing energy security and efficiency that this government has been really got at the forefront of. So the amount of homes that have been helped to reduce their energy bills through LED lights, through insulation, draft exclusion is fantastic. But again, we were talking about external forces. There has, particularly with the Trump presidency and the rise of the oil companies, there's been a real backlash against climate change. We've had far more exposure for those who deny that climate change even exists all over again. We're going right round in circles back to the 70s and the 80s when this first came up. And so people are becoming confused. There's a lot of misinformation about, and we're seeing even in the UK now about whether they should allow licenses to drill for new oil and gas. Now that was absolutely ruled out in the last Parliament. But will they do it now? Because we're getting to the point where things get difficult, and governments, again, we were talking about risk averse. Governments try not to annoy the population that's put them there, or the businesses that support them. But sometimes we have to.
And was the mistake possibly by introducing the Climate Change Act in the way that it was introduced? Because it effectively required a whole load of people to be employed to go round measuring stuff and getting views about how things actually work at the moment. So much of the effort really over the last 4 or 5 years has been focused on that, rather than actually introducing really effective energy insulation schemes. And
I disagree with you in part. I think, and again, I've worked with the climate change team, and these are committed people, absolutely committed Manx people who want to see the future of the Isle of Man safe, secure, and also want to make sure that we play our part in an existential problem.
But they're employed to follow the legislation that was passed, I suppose.
They're employed to look at how we go along with the law that was passed by the parliamentarians in Tynwald. You're quite right. And that's what they have to do. They have to work within the law. What I think they are very aware of is we need to try. We need, and we have started tweaking that. So talking about reducing emissions doesn't mean a lot to some people. They don't have the luxury of being able to do that. If you rent a flat and you have to have your old clapped out Fiesta to get you to work in time, you don't have a chance to start thinking about air source heat pumps, electric vehicles, and reducing your air flights every year. What we need to do is show the benefits that people can have. So a lot of the work that's been done in terms of the Green Living Grant Scheme, the energy efficiency schemes, reaching out to people saying, how can we help you to reduce your power usage so that you don't have to pay as much for your electricity, have actually touched thousands of people. And that's been incredibly successful. And again, it comes back to this idea that in politics, people need to see the benefits of the policies that have been brought in. A whole lot of glossy reports that sit on a shelf do not cut it anymore. We need to show people the benefits of reducing carbon emissions, moving from fossil fuels to electricity, in terms of the lights will stay on, your electricity bills will be cheaper, and if somebody starts bombing Iran again, then and the prices go up, it's not reflected in terms of the amount of money you have to spend on powering your car.
And on the subject, of course, of glossy reports, we can move on to housing. And if we had built a house for every glossy report, we'd probably be doing better than we actually did over this 5 years. And yet, everyone who stood in that election, almost everyone, I think everyone, said that we've got a housing crisis. Yep. I mean, and obviously, the way to address a housing crisis is to build houses.
Absolutely. And so in this administration, we started off with the Built Environment Reform Plan, program, BURP, as it was called. And that was looking at these blockers that affect housing, that affect the ability for private developers to build affordable and accessible housing, that affects local councils to do it, and individuals to extend their houses, improve them. And again, as I was saying, you need to have a look at the housing regulations. You need to make it far easier for people to build affordable housing. However, then you meet the objections. So when, for instance, Westmoreland Village was proposed, people started getting very, very worried about parking. That's a very personal thing. Yes, I want more housing, but if it's right next to me, I won't be able to park my car outside my house. So how can you reassure me about that? We also had a rejection, for the first time, of an area plan for the North and the West. Quite a comprehensive rejection from lots of parliamentarians. The same parliamentarians that stood saying, we want more houses, but then saying, we want more houses, but not there, somewhere else. And that's the beauty of Manx politics, is it is incredibly local and responding to your constituents, but one of the problems as well. If we want radical change, if we want to say we're going to build 1,000 houses over the next 5 years, for instance, where are they going to be? They could be anywhere, but where do people want to live? And where are those jobs that for those people in the schools and the health services, and how we tie all that together? And so, again, coming back to the idea of risk aversion, it makes it very difficult because people will object to planning applications. Some of the most bitterest arguments have been over planning in all administrations, and you all have been victim to some of those. We have a large island compared with Jersey and Guernsey, but you wouldn't think about it. You wouldn't think that sometimes, and people do get very threatened by large housing developments in their neighbourhoods because they think it will change the way of life in their villages, and it will do sometimes. But if we're absolutely honest about providing more houses, we need to build more. We also need to make it easier for people to extend, to downsize, to renovate flats above shops in our inner city centres. All these have been programmes put out by Department for Enterprise to give cash advantages for people who want to renovate flats. We've had the MDC, we've had the Infrastructure Investment Scheme. There are lots of more cranes round Douglas now building than there were at the start of this administration. That's real progress. That's a result of government policies. But it needs to carry on. It needs to be extended. And again, we need to make sure that local people see the benefit of that so that they don't object as much when there are other housing developments in areas like Peel, in areas like Laxey, in areas like Ramsey.
Your colleague in the Legislative Council, Paul Crane, has produced another of his population atlases, and he says that the strong evidence from around the world is that we're going to see a population collapse, a global population collapse. Are we possibly thinking in the wrong direction here in the Isle of Man about economic growth and building the population, particularly at a time when the UK politics and possibly the Isle of Man politics as well is against immigration, and we have falling birth rates. So inevitably that's going to mean falling population, and potentially 10 years' time we're not going to have a housing crisis in the way that we had. We're going to have a crisis where housing isn't worth anything near the paper value that it has had.
So, I mean, we could spend hours talking about population balancing. The reality is most Western democracies have got a decreasing birth rate. Part of that is it's expensive to have kids. Part of that is some people choose to have not to have kids. Some people, unfortunately, delay having kids until it's a little bit too late and have problems having kids. But it comes down to economics, it comes down to education, it comes down to personal choice. I disagree with Paul Crane. I mean, the Isle of Man has always been a mixing pot, and people have left the island, people have come to the island. Our young people have gone abroad for education, for experience, for jobs. Some of them come back, but some of their friends come here. And we've always been like that. I actually think the Isle of Man population will continue to grow. I think that the demographics are challenging, as they are in other small island nations and even larger island nations like Japan, with an ageing population. But we will need the young people there to look after the ageing population, and they will have kids who want education. So we will have to grow the island economy. When you look at what's happened in the past, not just to the Isle of Man, but also particularly the experience of Ireland, where you had mass exodus of the people, the entire island collapsed, it died. And it's taken generations to rebuild that. And that's our responsibility. Now, you talk about immigration being toxic, and a lot of that, unfortunately, is based on racism. The Isle of Man has always needed people to come here, migration. Immigration just means they come from outside the UK. The vast majority of people still come from the UK, from Northern Ireland. They're part of the common travel area. But with Brexit, we've had far less people coming from Europe, particularly from Eastern Europe, Poland, Spain, Italy, because those economies have got an awful lot better. I still don't quite understand how Spain and Greece have such a high youth unemployment rate and they're not enticed over here. We need to do some work with that. But what we've seen is that because of Brexit and less people coming from Europe, we've had to import some of the skilled workers from further afield, and that's been from Africa, that's been from Asia, Southeast Asia, India, Pakistan. And so the immigration debate, unfortunately, and the toxicity of it seeped in from the United Kingdom and some of the racist overtones there. However, the Isle of Man has always had a diverse population. When you look at the history of our nation, it's always been welcoming to people from wherever they are in the world, if they will play an active part and embrace the culture of the Isle of Man. And similarly, people from the Isle of Man have been embraced with cultures all over the Isle of the world and made significant contributions to places like Singapore. When I was in South Africa, I learnt that the first mayor of Johannesburg was a Manxman, because all the miners went over there. Same with America, same with Australia. So we have always travelled, but we've always accepted and welcomed travellers as long as they play their part in terms of our economy and contribute to the nation. And I think we need to be really keen on that, because if we're going to fill some of the vacancies that we've got, which go from computer programmers and compliance officers to chefs and cooks, we will need to try to attract the best in the world.
We've just about got a minute left, maybe a bit more than a minute. Tell me then what you would hope that the next 5 years will bring through the new House of Keys.
I hope it will bring focus. I hope it will bring honesty with the people of the Isle of Man who put people there. I think it also needs an element of bravery. It needs people who are elected to stand by their principles, to keep on reevaluating what they're doing and making sure it's the right thing, but to get the job done. Because the longer we prevaricate on some of the big problems we have, such as housing, such as healthcare, funding, such as the welfare state, such as the NI fund and its long-term sustainability, the longer we prevaricate about that, the more the danger of inaction overtakes perhaps the challenge of making difficult decisions.
Are you going to miss politics?
Yes. However, I will enjoy perhaps taking a bit of time out, a little bit of a back seat. Supporting anyone who wants to stand, but actually playing more of a role in Ramsey, in terms of my life there and my family's life there, and perhaps a bit less time going backwards and forwards over the mountain road and being sucked into Douglas and Tynwald.
That was now former Ramsey MHK Alex Allinson. So what do you think? Did the good doctor deliver the right medicine for the island? Is Manx Care still the best option for delivering health services? What next for Ramsey? Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast. I'm Phil Gaughan. Go to Myers on Geisach Rum. Thanks for listening.